Hey guys, and let's get started talking about the subject of this video, which is the 2020 Senate race and the political ladder climbing of Joe Kennedy III versus Ed Markey. So, this is a pretty recent topic as it's only been going on for a couple of months. And in fact, this is a primary race in Massachusetts where the other senator is Elizabeth Warren. So, this is a pretty star-studded political field, Massachusetts. Democrat only, of course, but, Charlie Baker's a rhino, so I don't count him as a Republican, really. But if you look at the material of such articles, they're painting a really good picture of what's going on in here. And in fact, he has a lot of money, millions of dollars, and he has some key endorsements. But the fact still remains that while Kennedy was ahead, like 9 points in their debate, you could see that Kennedy's race is tightening and his chances are getting slimmer. Now, if we look at the origins of Joe Kennedy, you can see that from 1884, the Kennedys have been in politics. So they've been in politics like 140 years at this point. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations of politicians. You can see that his great-great-great-grandfather was the mayor of Boston, a state representative and state senator. His great-grandfather was a U.S. ambassador to the U.K. and a congressman. His grandfather basically was Robert F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy was his great-uncle, his other great-uncle Ted Kennedy. His second cousin, once removed, I think, was a representative in Rhode Island. You could look at his aunt or something. That's an Obama type person. I think she was ambassador to Ireland, etc., etc. Arnold Schwarzenegger is his uncle through marriage. His dad was representative. Okay, so clearly there's a ton of information here. All right, a lot of politicians. Even his mother was married to Cuomo for a while. So this guy is, if there was a picture with next to the definition of establishment, this is what it is. This is a dynastic figure. He is not even 40 years old, and he's running for Senate. So that shows that he's already trying to go very far in life, like his great-uncle did. And if you look into his credentials, he went to Stanford and Harvard Law School, all right? So he went to the right places. He has the right connections to the point where he even went to go volunteer in the Peace Corps. He's a fluent speaker in Spanish. Why? Probably so that he could get the Spanish appeal, and he knows the demographics of this country are changing. So he knows this. And then when you look at his congressional tenure, in his early 30s, he had already run for Congress. So he was being pretty quick. You can tell the Democratic establishment likes him. As of 2018, they made him respond to Donald Trump's State of the Union, even though they almost never give it to like a second-term congressman, which is weird. And also, Kennedy was taught by his law school professor, Elizabeth Warren. So this is pretty important because this means that Elizabeth Warren's somewhat obliged to endorse Joe Kennedy, which is interesting. And if you look at his elections, he'll easily win anything in Massachusetts, of course. And when we look at this 2020 Senate election, you could see that the Republican contester doesn't even matter. But what really matters is the primary. And when we look at the Real Politics poll, Joe Kennedy is winning by 5. As of yesterday, he's winning by 5 with 10% undecided. So Ed Markey could easily win if he gets more than half of the undecideds. And if he's the incumbent, then they're probably going to go for him. And ironically, the young guy who's like 40 is less progressive than the 75-year-old man who is Ed Markey. And if you look at such polls, they're back and forth. And isn't that pretty crazy, guys, how this is forming up? Now, if you look at the Republican primary, you have some retard Indian nobody and some attorney. So there's no competition in this respect. In fact, he could honestly win by over 80% because nobody's going to be running for the Republicans. I don't even know. So that's what's going on in this primary, according to this article. And then when you look at Ed Markey, you can see that his credentials are pretty extensive. In fact, he was in the Army for years in the reserve, so that's pretty good. You look at who he's married to. He's married to some Jew who is a low-level politician. He went to Boston College, which is good optics. He was a member of a congressman in Massachusetts for 3 years. He was a member of the Congress for 27 years, and he's been in the Senate almost at the same time as Elizabeth Warren has. So you can see that he's been in government approximately 47 years, and in the army before that. So he's a career politician, similar to Joe Biden. In fact, I'm pretty sure they've been in the Congress for the same amount of time. So that's pretty important. And if you can see who's in his ranks, you can tell that he was establishment as well. He was friends with Tip O'Neill, who was the Senate majority, the House Speaker for like 10 years. And of course, he rode the wave of the Congress, where the Democrats were in power the first 20 years he was there. Imagine how long he had to be there for that to happen before 1994. And on domestic issues, he's been pretty Democrat. He's been far left as hell. He's easily in the top 5 most progressive representatives, which is probably putting him into equilibrium with Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Patrick Leahy, Ron Wyden, etc. And then when you look at where he's serving, is he in an important spot? Will Kennedy get the same spot? Probably yes, because he's plugged into everything. And if you were to look at the Committee of Commerce is important. The environment is important. He's very pro Green New Deal. On abortion, he's completely for partial birth abortion, and even Kennedy's for it as well. But it's Massachusetts, so what do you expect? He wants to expand child care. He wants to fight climate change, even though that's BS. So here he is simping for AOC's plan. And obviously he wants to legalize a lot of drugs. In fact, probably weed and others. On the economy, he wants to break up the monopoly of T-Mobile and Sprint, which is an oxymoron. That's stupid. And in general, he's very hostile to capitalism. And he wants a lot of gun control, of course. And he's an idiot because he wants a fingerprint scanner on guns, which is like retarded. And he wants to ban bump stocks, semi-autos. So you can't have a M14 from the 40s, and you can't have a hunting rifle that just happens to not have a bolt in it, right? Like, that's kind of insane. He supports Medicare for all, a single payer, which is retarded. That's socialist. And then when you look at housing, he wants to expand housing. He wants to expand immigration, and he wants to give amnesty, apparently. On gay issues, he's been very left, of course. On the military, he wants to cut the military, obviously. And all this is just insane. And then he's married to the one of the assistant surgeon generals, so he's pretty establishment as well. But this guy was born into it, whereas Markey had to work his way up. And when we look at the voting record of Kennedy, in terms of the Democrats, he's in the middle of the bunch. In fact, he's like right here. So he's approximately, I would say, not a centrist Democrat, but he's just a typical liberal Democrat, which will make him pretty palatable to the audience of Massachusetts. And when you look at the Republicans, he's like a mirror version of, let's say, Congressman. Let me see if I can find a. There's no relevant ones in this. Yeah, he's like Tipton, or he's like Roger Marshall. So he's like Roger Marshall, but a liberal, if you understand what I'm saying. So he's not too far. He's not an extremist by any means, but he's not a centard either. So he's just a liberal. And clearly he's not. The one thing he's not liberal on is marijuana. For whatever reason, he does not want to legalize marijuana, but he wants to legalize transsexual children or whatever the left wants to do nowadays. You can tell he got a D on marijuana laws because he's so against marijuana. I honestly don't know why he wants to do that, but that's just an obvious thing. And yeah, so he's liberal, but he's not crazy liberal either, especially from such a blue state, which obviously means that he's probably trying to go for a higher office. And then when you look at Ed Markey, you could see him in the Senate, and in the Senate, he's really far left. He's about as far left as is Senator John Thune or or Tim Scott, the black guy from South Carolina. That's about as far left as he is. So he's more extremist than Marco Rubio is. Okay, so he's like the Tea Party, but if it were for the Democrats. So he's very progressive, and like I told you, top 5 most progressives. You can see who's on the far left, and he's the 5th. Yeah, I told you, top 5. He's only more centrist than Gillibrand, Merkley, Harris, and Sanders. Pretty insane, right? So that's what it is. He only does slightly better with weed. He's at a C instead of a D, which is interesting. So that's what it is in this record. So you can tell if you look over here, he's the 5th most liberal, whereas Kennedy's like the 400th or the 200th most liberal. So he's a moderate in terms of the Democratic Party. And then when you look at the debates, you can tell that Merkley's resents Kennedy with a burning passion and kind of illustrates the point that they are that he's just trying to cheat his turn, basically. And that is to say that Merkley is 74 years old, and if he were to serve one more term, he'd be 80 by the time he would be up for re-election in 2026. And obviously, I'm pretty sure he would retire, and that's what he's implying. So he's like, come on, dude, why are you not letting me have this one term? And that's because Joe Kennedy wants to run for president. In fact, John Kennedy, JFK, his great uncle, ran for president after he was a senator. So that's probably what he's doing. And if you look at Elizabeth Warren, she is going to run in 2024, I think, for re-election, even though she's old. And that seat won't be available officially until like 2030 for him, and he does not want to lay around in the Congress for another 10 years because he's that opportunistic. So he wants to climb the ladder prematurely and take out Merkley and find a slot there. And then when we go into this final, why do I make a video on this? Why is this important? Because if he wins his Senate seat, he can really So if he wins his Senate seat, he's going to be able to become a senator, which means that he will be able to run for president after that by 2024. And by 2024, assuming Trump wins in 2020, you can have Mike Pence be the nominee, and then let's say the second place in the nomination is Nikki Haley, so she becomes the vice presidential candidate. And then when you look at Joe Kennedy, he would probably pick, I don't know, somebody young, so let's say Pete Buttigieg, and this would be the map, right, with the toss-ups excluded. So when you do the election and you run the simulation, you can tell that Kennedy is not the worst opponent, but is he the best? I don't know. So let's assume Trump has a good economy, everything recovers. But we'll have everything be as it will probably be if Joe Kennedy is the nominee for 2024. And as you can see, Joe Kennedy is able to somewhat seizure the Rust Belt because Mike Pence does not have the appeal. With Nikki Haley, he's more of a Sun Belt, Georgia Bush terms of appeal. So this would go back to the Democrats, I would assume. And clearly this is not the best thing for either party, really. But this is what happens. And, he's establishment, so he'll do great in Virginia. And he will obviously win New Hampshire. It's a neighboring state. And then when you look at the at-large, I think all of this, basically, besides maybe one congressional district, would go for Joe Kennedy and Pete Buttigieg. So when we look at this final election, it would go down to Pennsylvania, and who would win? Well, in all likelihood, because of the 3-term thing, the whole incumbency advantage lost when you're running for a third term of a political party that's homogeneous, and you have the Trump people that might oppose Nikki Haley, and you could have Mike Pence not being so cool in the Midwest, and he's more of a globalist. So we could say that because he is good with the Sun Belt, he could win Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona, and Texas safe. But other than that, I do think that Kennedy would be able to edge him out in Pennsylvania. So this is what would happen if Joe Kennedy wins the nomination for the Senate seat in Massachusetts. This is what could happen when you let him climb the ladder. If this doesn't happen, then he definitely won't be a nominee for 2024. Maybe he could be in 2032 or something like that. But clearly, this could definitely change the impact of history for sure. Thank you guys for watching.